Welcome to another edition of Jerry's Take on China. Today, I'm not going to talk about China much, I'm talking about America. It started about 2017. In the years leading up to that, China was variously described as a rising power, a sleeping dragon, and many times as a collapsing economy. Most of the rhetoric is driven from the US. Inside their government, both the Senate and Congress have people who hate China. Their State Department seems to see a threat at every turning point, and their military seems to believe that a defensive People's Liberation Army is a bad thing as it threatens US interests. Books have been written about social unrest that I've never seen. Reports and documentaries are created about mass dissatisfaction, but extended academic research seems unable to identify that. In short, the experts seem to think it's about to collapse, while the people in power seem to think it's a huge threat, and some people think both. The strangest part of it all is, after 18 years of living here, I actually can't find very much to criticize China for. On the other hand, there are a lot of things to criticize the US about. But the interesting thing is this: the US is so open about its transparency that it's easy to find government-issued statistics and then criticize them. Many in the US see this as one of their best features. In fact, they say they're open and they have their problems, but they can accept criticism. I'm often told on Twitter or other social media platforms that I'm wrong about America because I haven't been there. I know nothing, I can't comment. But these are the same people who openly admit they wouldn't set foot in China because they tell me it's dangerous and authoritarian. So it works both ways. It's certainly not true that the US accepts criticism, and in a country that claims it values freedom of speech, they simply suppress it. This was evidenced by the interview just a few days ago with Mark Zuckerberg on the Joe Rogan show. He clearly stated Facebook have the ability to suppress, and that Twitter blocked something that his organization merely suppressed so it didn't get the coverage it would normally get because the FBI asked them to. Now, Americans can say things that are offensive to the government. They can openly criticize, which is good, and even insult their leaders, which Chinese people say is bad. They can vote for a change in government from very low-level local leaders right the way through to the president, and that's all fine and dandy. However, unless someone can prove me wrong here, it seems nothing an individual can do will make a change, and that's not really so fine and dandy. People there say it's a great country to live in and things get done on a local level. This may be true. Certainly in the 1950s and 60s, the American dream was a dream worth pursuing. But sometime in the latter half of the last century, things started to change. Imagine for a moment the 50s and 60s incredible infrastructure and growth. If that had continued, maybe if America hadn't gone to Vietnam, that was about the turning point. We'd probably be living in a very different world now. Infrastructure, health, the nation's economy, they'd all be more important than individual wealth, and a military that sucks the country dry of all of its investable income. I hesitate to say this, but what the USA was doing during that era is exactly what China is now doing, investing in the health and wealth of its nation so that its people can benefit. They're expanding these investments to third world countries for mutual benefit. In the last few years particularly, there's been some sinister and dark changes in the US. This information is all available, it's open for everyone to see, but it seems Americans either don't want to, don't know how to, somehow they may be prevented from accessing it, or perhaps, as Mark Zuckerberg has indicated it's possible, someone has suppressed it. But if you ask Google the right questions and are prepared to do a little digging, it's easy to find out how deep and how bad the rot is. I just wonder, do the people of America really know how bad it is? Do they even care? What started me on this track was an English language article in a Chinese media outlet called GD Today. The Dark Side of the Beacon, it was called, written by a journalist friend of mine, Lydia Liu, who asked me if I'd take a look and edit anything I found wrong with the English. Topically for that time, because it was released just before the human rights abuses on Xinjiang report were there. It was a very topical thing. The Americans were jumping up with glee about what the human rights thing was going to say. While the US is very good at pointing fingers overseas, there's a problem in its own backyard that they're not seeing. They're not seeing their media publicize it either. But in keeping with the spirit of transparency, the information is readily available for anyone who wants to look. As mentioned in the Beacon article, the US always prides itself as being a beacon of democracy and a protector of human rights. But underneath this beacon, it's downright dark, especially if you're a victim of human trafficking. Every year, there's been an increase in the number of human trafficking cases reported. Is this the result of better reporting or the result of increased crime in this area? It's well known that this is a multi-billion-dollar global crime business. According to the United Nations, it's worth about $150 billion annually. And in the US, it's also known that this affects tens of thousands of people from as young as 1 year old. That's according to the official website humantraffickinghotline.org. The US is known to commit many crimes in the names of national security, but to deflect from this inside its own country, it projects those crimes and problems onto other countries, in particular Russia, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and of course China. But this is not the half of it. It gets worse, a whole lot worse. So here are some of the things the US is doing wrong. And every single comment is supported by a citation, mostly from the US government websites. You can see them by clicking on the link below to an article that I've written. The US speaks badly of China's police as authoritarian. Not one person has been shot or killed by a police officer in years. In fact, in the last 5 years, only 2 people on the mainland have been shot by police. One in 2019, one in 2018. Both were at the time using vehicles intent on killing or injuring other citizens. The US accuses China of being authoritarian when they have 4% of the world's population but hold over 20% of the entire world's prison population. The US has 655 people per 100,000 incarcerated, compared to China's 121. They point at China's shoddy workmanship as their own bridges are falling over due to 50 years' lack of maintenance. Their homes are collapsing because of poor construction policies. They accuse China of intellectual property theft when their own science is years behind. And at the same time, their FBI advises US IP theft is not growing, but is already a massive problem requiring the formation of a property rights coordination center in the USA. They allege China won't share space technology or science technology when they have legislated to stop NASA sharing with China. They accuse China of propaganda while they budget $300 million a year for negative media reports on China and have proposed a further $500 million a year. They speak of corporate crime in China as if this was exclusive to the country and the fault of poor governance, while it was the USA which almost brought the world to its knees more than once through corporate crimes, which for the most part remain unpunished. Closer inspection reveals US corporations are directly responsible for all, not just some, of the worst corporate crimes in human history. This year even saw their own babies dying in a tainted milk scandal. They claim to support a free market economy while they sanction over 20 countries, hundreds of companies, and thousands of individuals. They talk about inhumane lockdowns in China, where people are regularly delivered free food, free testing, as well as free hospital care if they test COVID positive. All this is while the US have watched as more than 1 million of their own population died, compared to just 6,000 in China. The US failure to manage COVID also means more than 70 million Americans must come to the terms of an uncertain future due to complications of long-term COVID. They speak of themselves as being the land of the free and the home of the brave, and they attempt to highlight human rights abuses of other countries, while they lock up thousands of families and separate children from their mothers on the border. They're known to illegally arrest and imprison suspects without trial, often moving them to black sites where they are able to use torture techniques which have been legalized by their government but renamed enhanced interrogation. They accuse China of military proliferation when only one Chinese military site exists overseas. It's used in cooperation with US troops in the same region, Djibouti, while at the same time the US has 750 bases and 200,000 troops stationed overseas. They allege China is militarizing the South China Sea when they have a US self-defense force, including 2 of their own and 2 other aircraft carriers, as well as over 70 other Allied ships sailing off or near the coast of China. Their military, with the exception of the National Guard, are unable to operate inside the USA due to a Posse Comitatus Act. When they do act, they act to defend the government against the people, while Chinese People's Liberation Army enjoys massive public support because of the help they provide in times of disaster or other special needs. The US accuses China of using forced labor, a claim which remains unproven and unlikely, while using their own incarcerated prisoners as almost unpaid and involuntary employees in a legalized, under their constitution, system of slave labor. They speak of freedom of speech while they lock up lawyers for finding guilt in their oil company executives and journalists for showing international crimes committed by their military, crimes which the International Criminal Court can't investigate or prosecute because they'll be sanctioned, which they have, or even invaded if they try to do this. America boasts of liberty and freedoms, but 115,000 people have been shot and wounded, 45,000 people died from private gun wounds last year. They praise their medical systems, but charge so much money that 530,000 people declared bankruptcy last year because of medical bills. They have the world's best universities, but common people can't afford to study there. They incur half a lifetime of high interest debt, up to 13%, compared to the normal rate of 0.5. And this is a debt they cannot default on through legal bankruptcy. They claim to be the world's police, but they have a murder rate of 7 per 100,000, with some cities, New Orleans, 35 per 100,000, and Detroit, 65 per 100,000, compared to China's 0.5 or Hong Kong's 0.2. They claim to bring peace and democracy in a war on terror, but have killed 929,000 people and created 38 million refugees in the last 28 years. 40% of their own people don't have enough food, but they spend billions on their own military and send many more billions to places like Israel and Ukraine, as well as other countries. They're spending more billions on drug enforcement every year, and the number of drug addictions and drug-related deaths continues to increase exponentially. Last year, more than 100,000 people died of drug overdoses. There are 39 million known illegal drug users in America, more than 1 in 10. They're the richest country in the world with a per capita GDP 436% of the world's average, but a poverty rate of 11.4% and 500,000 people living on the streets. 1% of the richest people hold 15 times more wealth than the bottom 50%, and 10% own 90% of all the stocks available in the country, as well as 70% of all the money. They claim to be a country of equality, but white Americans hold 85% of the wealth, black Americans just 4%. The other 10% or so is shared amongst Native Americans, Asians, and Hispanic Americans. The number of black prisoners in the US prison system, 1,240 per 100,000, is 5 times greater than the proportion of whites. In every state, in every category, whites are imprisoned less than black, Hispanic, or Latino Americans. They have a 20-year war on terror, which has killed several major leaders such as Gaddafi, Hussein, and bin Laden. Yet there's strong evidence that all three of those dead enemies were once allies of their own intelligence community. So as many people say to me when they refer to China, I love the country and I love the people, maybe I love the food too, but I hate the government. I think it's time we turn the tables around. Once again, thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed, please think about sharing this and subscribing. My usual videos are about life in China, not the United States, and won't all be as negative as this one. I just think that, given times that we have right now, this really needed to be told. So thanks again, and see you next time.